Hello and welcome to this conversation about the importance of and challenges around diversity and inclusion in business. D&I is not and should not be a new area of conversation for any of us in corporate. But what's important is, are we making considered and impactful moves in the right direction? I'm Amirah, a member of Elixir's South African team, and today I'm really excited to present a very special panel for this conversation, a group of people that I personally admire. We've got Brandon Bichler, a partner from Elixir, Celiwe Ross, the Director of Human Capital at Old Mutual, and Funeka Montjane, the CEO of Consumer and High Net Worth Clients at Standard Bank. To get us started, Brandon, I'm going to point to you. Would you like to share a little more with us about yourself and why this topic is something that you've been actively involved in?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Amirah. So as a partner at Elixir and one of the leaders of the firm, it's my responsibility to build the highest performing team possible for now and for the future. And for me, diversity plays an absolutely pivotal role in doing that. The simple fact is that a diverse workforce breeds creativity, innovation, and better performance. I saw a study that in 2019, companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity outperformed the bottom quartile by 36% in profitability. So this is a strategic issue. This is a business imperative. But I think it also helps businesses gain a better understanding of the very customers they're trying to serve. How many times have we seen executives sitting on top of a company that don't represent the customers they're trying to serve? So I think that's an important aspect as well. On a personal basis, I actually had a huge privilege to grow up in a very diverse school environment. In fact, I grew up in the United States in the South. A place that had been racially segregated for decades and decades. I went to a school that was one of the first in the country to voluntarily integrate schools. So I see that as a huge advantage. I got to grow up with people from a variety of backgrounds, socioeconomic, ethnic, you name it, we basically had it. And I saw, I think, firsthand during my formative years, the power of that mix of having people really from different backgrounds. And it's amazing that people have gone on to do amazing things from there. Professionally, I've also had the privilege of being white and male. And to be very honest, it took me years to realize how I needed to be the one to make a difference, to really make a change. It was kind of easy to say, hey, the doors are open, anyone can come in. Why doesn't diversity just happen? It's not that we're preventing things from happening. Well, that's not enough. We have to be very proactive to sponsor people, to reach out to communities that don't have the same chances. And so I think, to be very honest, that's been a journey of awakening for me, and to realize that I need to play an ever more active role in making sure that we have a workforce that is diverse and achieves that business that I spoke about at the beginning. So that's why this show is important to me. That's why I feel very privileged to have all of you join me today. And I can't wait to get started in some of the discussion. Celiwe, maybe we could start just with you. I'd be really interested to know kind of what was it as you were growing up, personally and professionally. Were there a few pivotal moments that really mattered for you, both in terms of your understanding of the importance of diversity, but also obviously your path is to becoming a leader?
Yeah, thanks very much, Brandon. And it's something that I think I've spent a lot of time kind of introspecting on as I was starting to prepare for this. Because I find in one's leadership journey, you almost piece pieces together to try and make sense of it. Because in a way, you end up where you end up, and it's a journey of little pieces. And only when you take a step back and look at it, do you really start to make sense of why you think the way that you do, why you are the way that you are. And for me, it's been a great moment of introspection. So anyway, I come from a very small nuclear family. I have an identical twin sister, and my parents only had us, two girls. And dare I say, two very nerdy girls. So I was very, very bookish as a child, very good at math, very good at English, very good at the sciences, not good at sport at all. I've been wearing glasses since I was 12. I wore braces along with them at a point. That was me as a teenager. So yeah, I think it was a journey of self-discovery as a young girl who was not, like I was not your quintessential popular girl, sporty, sort of into what was perceived to be cool then. I enjoyed school, and fortunately, our father was very encouraging in that. Both of us ended up going on to study engineering, and very much credit that to the male figure in our house, the sole male figure in our house, which was our dad. Dad was extremely encouraging, very much believing in education as the only opportunity that he could give to us as his only two children. And we grabbed it with both hands. And fortunately, we both ended up at university and both studied engineering, but I would say also atypical engineering sciences. My twin sister is a civil engineer by training, and I'm a mining engineer by training. And I guess for me, when people ask me why, I guess it's a fearlessness that you grow up with when you realize that anything is possible. And that's the greatest gift that my dad gave to us. He just never limited us by gender or by thought. And growing up, I didn't actually realize it could be a limitation. I also went to a girls only school for most of my life. And I think that also contributed, just because I didn't have that competitive tension that made me feel different for being smart, for being a girl. It's not something that I was consciously aware of until I started working. As I said, I'm a mining engineer by training, and all mining engineers have to work on a mine. And I guess for me, the awakening of how different it is to be a girl came when I started to work, because I had to report to a very small town, like in the outskirts of rural areas in South Africa, to go and start working on a mine. And I remember my first day going underground. So dressed in overalls and boots and a hard hat, I would have thought no one can tell what sits under there. Like no one could tell I'm a girl. Maybe my ponytail at the back, but they would have had to be paying attention to see. And this was a type of mine where it wasn't a shaft that goes vertically down underground. You actually go down by a form of conveyor belt that's like a set of swings that you have to hold on to. And as I was walking in, there's this cacophony of noise. It's lots of men, it's hot, it's steamy, it's the start of the morning, guys are wanting to rush in and get to work. And I'm the only girl there. I don't know any of them. I'm trying to figure out where to go. And I can see they're all heading down for their shift. And this set of swings just goes round and round this way. And when you get your turn, you grab like a handle they've got, you run a little bit, and then you sit on the chair. And I watched them a few times going through this. And by now I can figure out they're all quiet. People are kind of looking at me, figuring out how's she going to do this? Because I think they'd figured out like there's a girl underground. I was 23 years old. Anyway, I watched them do this a few times, and eventually I got to the front of the queue, and I remember asking the guy behind me, please, can you come in front of me? Like I needed one more turn to watch this whole thing play itself out. Anyway, long story short, when it came my turn, I watched my chair coming towards me, grabbed the handle, ran with it, and sat on the chair. And I just heard this roar underground of cheers as I made it onto my chair. And I think that was my first awareness of my own difference, right? I worked in a small section with guys who were my father's age, many of them, and really spent a lot of time listening to their stories. When you rely on each other literally for life, your safety depends upon each other every day, so you have to trust each other. Your bonuses depend on each other because whatever you produce over and above what's been set for you, you have to share together. So any targets, goals that you set are yours jointly, but also your combined futures, your combined successes on that team and on that leader. And every day had its own adventures. There were days when we didn't have air, like fresh oxygen, not breathing air, but to work. There were days when there was no water. There were days when trains weren't working, all sorts of problem solving things that we had to sit together and say, how do we get through this day so we can achieve what we've set out to do? But also at times when, production was down, machinery was not working, I had an opportunity to listen to guys, as I said, who were mostly my dad's age, possibly just a little bit younger. This is all they knew. They probably never finished high school. They'd never lived the life I'd lived. They'd never been to the schools I'd been to, but they had dreams, right? They had desires for their kids and for their families. They had plans, they had beliefs, and they needed a place to rely on. And for me, I guess it really taught me a lot about the role of leaders at that time, because it was such a different environment for someone like me to be in, but to also realize the influence that I could have, not only over them, but over their joint futures, because it was very clear to them that I was not going to be underground forever. You know, I was on some accelerated program. That wasn't for me the most important thing. I think the most important thing was the humanity of them, you know, the humanity of their stories, as different as they were, and so different to me. They were nothing like me, all of them. But understanding how my influence could make a difference, how my education could accelerate their own growth, their own development. And fundamentally, I think just what unites us as people. And many people ask me, how did a very technical engineer end up in the people space? And I think when I thought back over the last few days about why, I've just generally always been fascinated by people, and why people are the way that they are, and why we behave the way that we do, what drives us, what motivates us, what changes us if we ever change. And it's what led me to what I do. I'm the human capital director of a multinational insurer. We are present in 13 African countries, fundamentally a South African headquartered company, but present across the continent. And I mean, I have a different story about my love and passion for the continent because I spent a lot of time living in West Africa, but again, have always been challenged and fascinated by people and why people do things the way that they do, and our role as leaders in crafting people, crafting our own journeys, why that sort of representativity matters, why it changes things, and why it influences things. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Celiwe. You know what I really resonated with and actually got goosebumps when you shared the bit about being underground and getting on the swing like that. I think that's, you know, one, such a remarkable story, and two, amazing that that was the point at which you realized or recognized your difference. And something I'm quite keen to dive into a little bit more later is about recognizing those differences and what we do to not lose them, but make them a position of strength, if anything. But on that, Funeka, if I can hand over to you to similarly share with us a little bit more about your background, and some of those pivotal moments, both in your upbringing or early career.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be on this wonderful panel with such great people. I was listening to Celiwe just talking about the early recognition. In my case, I grew up in a village, which is about 150 kilometers from Johannesburg. But in the 80s, it was much further away, you know, like psychologically. It was during the days of apartheid where there was a concept of homeland where similar groupings of people had to sort of live away from the urban or economic centers, let's call it that. So my family, although we are Xhosa for a variety of reasons, ended up in a homeland called Gwandebele, which is about 150 kilometers away. I think it's probably similar to any groupings of people who are meant to identify with something called culture. It was an environment where women were supposed to be a particular way. So a woman is supposed to cover your hair, and a woman is supposed to, particularly a married woman, you're supposed to cover your shoulders, and you're supposed to do A, B, C, and D. And then enter my Xhosa grandmother, who was the ultimate disruptor, just never believed in anything that she was supposed to do. So, I mean, when I think back to the story, I think this must have been something. She must have been a force of nature when we started school. She was straight from Johannesburg. And you must remember, these are like rural areas with no tarred roads, etc. But she was wearing her high-heeled shoes, kind of thing. In my primary school, she used to wear her heels, you know, and she spoke English. You know, now remember, these are villages where people never spoke. So she'd go to school and then she'd say to the teachers, where's the lavatory? And then they'll be like, Gogo, what? And she'd say, you call yourself a teacher and you don't know where the lavatory is. And she used to have these rituals that basically puts every teacher on notice every year that my kid is here, and I have high expectations for her. So I think seeing her handle herself, there are too many when we sit together as a family and think of her moments. There's been so many moments where she directly questions authority, particularly on things that are gender, that you're not supposed to be here, or I'm gonna hit you. And she was very short, but very strong, and so she was willing to take on anyone. Brandon, you're smiling. She'll take on any guy. So if a guy says, I'm gonna hit you, she'll say, okay, come, let's fight. So now, of course, I don't know, I'm sure she was bluffing kind of thing, but I think as a guy, you don't want to find that out, right? You don't want to be that guy who's beat by a chick kind of thing. So I think for me, like seeing her, my gran, and I had two grands who are sisters. Both of them are these formidable women who always questioned authority and who sort of really, in a real way, demonstrated to me that there isn't anything that I do not have. And sort of, I guess, in their lives and experiences, sort of made it really clear to me. I guess I saw it very early on that it wasn't going to be easy, that the world does have a different expectation for women, but that I don't have to accept it, that in a way, it is my role to sort of take the difficulties and the gains that they had made to take it forward to a little bit of a step further. But I mean, I consider that to be probably one of the greatest gifts that anybody could have received, and such an early preparation for the reality of the world without acceptance, with a sense where at the same time you see this is where the world is, but very clearly understanding your role in it and the fact that you still have a proper choice of being able to do that. So that's probably one of the biggest things in my life. I mean, my grandmothers are now 80 and 87, and they still like amazingly fierce women, and I guess they tell stories of their grandparents and their mothers, etc., who are that fierce. So in my family, we've got this mythology of really fierce women, and that is so helpful in a journey like this one.
Yeah, Funeka, I was smiling because I also had a grandmother that had a massive impact on me, and I especially laughed about the high heels. So to literally till the day she unfortunately passed away, she wore high heels and put on makeup every day till the very end. She was taking on that world, and she was going to do it in style.
Yeah.
But I love how you talked about non-acceptance of the status quo. I think that's a key thing. Is we maybe as humans, and Celiwe, you talked about it. The human behavior aspect. Patterns form, and most of us just go into the pattern because it's culturally that's a safe place.
Yeah.
You go into the place where the pattern exists. If I just follow the pattern, then I will be safe. Do you think that's one of the root causes of some of the issues we have to make more progress?
I think that it's exactly that. I think the human brain and the collective human brain and consciousness is a highly efficient thing. So neurological pathways are real. As you and I are sitting here, we are breathing, but it's not that you're actively breathing. Breathing is happening. You're not circulating blood. The circulation of blood is happening because that neurological pathway exists. So to go in there to change at an individual, at a collective perspective, to change those neurological pathway of what is normal is very hard. And it's there for a reason, right? Because actually, I think that the things that we have to do on a daily basis are quite hard and are quite demanding. And if you did not have the script, you wouldn't actually do them. And that is why change is so difficult. I find so much of what we personalize isn't actually that personal. It's because of people, it's just like success, right? Successful people generally find themselves within a particular forest, and they grow with that forest. And so it's easy for us, for that person then to take credit for that, just like it's easy to criticize someone who comes from the desert for their losses, kind of thing, right? Or their lack of progress. But it isn't that. It's actually almost always systemic. So changing that system, changing that is the hardest thing. And I think for me that is a helpful thing, because depersonalization of the journey for me, I find that it's helpful in a sense that it gives me energy, as opposed to be involved in personal things that suck away energy, where I'm personalizing people's sort of like behavior, which is a reflection of the entire system.
Something that really sparked for me there is, and we've spoken about this before, Funeka, I don't know if you remember, we had a chat a long time ago about changing the script for men and women in leadership. And I completely hear you and understand you about the challenges of personalizing things, but at the same time, I look at some of the corporate spaces that I interact in and how people are so desperate for a practical guide to changing that narrative or changing that script, because they recognize the problem and then the need to do something, but that deeper understanding of changing, people's behaviors and mindsets is not there. And something that I feel works effectively only because very recently it touched me a lot is representation and that visual of seeing the change. So the way you talk about your grandmother, and this is not at all a like by like comparison, but what it reminded me of is Elixir recently appointed Lakshmi Reddy, who is a partner in the US of Southeast Asian descent. And seeing her around that partner table has done insane things for me. It's made me realize that is, it's always been somewhere I've aspired to be as long as I've been with the company, but it seems more attainable now. It seems more exciting. It seems like the opportunity is there. And that is something that I can see immediately changes the behavior of an organization and the thinking of the people that work at the lower levels. I guess where I'm going is, when we talk about those practical aspects to changing that script, with the difficulty of not being able to change behavior without the right expertise in an organization, what are the kinds of things we can do to start getting the company and the conversation to move that way?
I think representation matters. I definitely think so. I shared a story before, and it's actually like a goosebump moment for me again to have to reshare it, because I actually started a big part of my formative career was at Standard Bank, which is where Funeka works now. And when I started my career at Standard Bank, she was the CFO of personal and business banking. If I think back to that time, and this is like the early 2000s, and I try to think about women at that level, women who look like me, sound like me, etc., at that level, there really weren't many. They've done huge strides. Like I take my hat off to the journey of Standard Bank from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And it's not just gender, right? It's about representation across the continent, a number of other things that they've had to think through as an organization. But representativity matters, because when you see, whether it's their annual report or you see them at different platforms, you can see yourself. It's something that I continuously challenge my children's schools on. And it sounds so small, but I think it matters. Because if the only teacher that they see that's a teacher that looks and sounds like them is the teacher that teaches an African language, I have an issue with that. They need to see Black teachers who teach math, who teach accountancy, who teach science. They need to see it. It needs to be real for them. And I guess for me, that's why representativity matters. It's just an attachment to the fact that if she can do it, I can. And today, I'm on the same platform as Funeka Montjane, who like 15 years ago, when I was starting out, she was like an unattainable beacon, but a beacon nonetheless, right? It was just something that was possible. It just said that it's possible. And I don't think you realize that you're fighting for that possibility. It's not something that you consciously do, but in your subconscious, it says there is a distinct possibility that I could be that person and I could get there in my own way, in my own time. But she has done it. She's from a similar background to me, and I can too. I think that's the first thing for me about representativity. And the second thing, and I guess as I'm getting older and challenging myself fundamentally a lot, is I heard a South African celebrity say recently that you need to give yourself a chance to suck at something new. And the way that I interpret that is to constantly challenge yourself with difference. I think one of the biggest inhibitors to diversity and inclusion generally is because we tend to get comfortable with the forest, as Funeka called it. I love that because we all grow and nurture each other. And you'll find that many of us in our friendship circles are now fairly successful, fairly mature in our careers. Children are about the same age, except mine. But, there's a number of those sorts of dynamics that are at play. But how many of us have friends who don't come from where we come from, don't speak the languages we speak, don't look like we look, don't believe what we believe, don't have the same sexual orientation as we do, choose not to have children, choose to have many children, whatever the difference may be. I think we need to be careful about reducing diversity and inclusion down to race and gender. Yes, race and gender are important conversations, but they are bigger than that, especially in the world that we live in today. And a lot of what's happening in the world today, I think, comes from an intolerance of difference. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to be able to tolerate it. You have to be able to converse with it on some level and get comfortable with it. There's a difference for me.
Go ahead, Funeka, yeah.
Sorry, Brandon, I agree with you. I guess, if I were to maybe add a little bit more on what you said, is that I think one of the reasons why I think representation matters is because I think what's unique about us as human beings is that we have an ability to experience, to see something that someone is experiencing and actually physically experience it ourselves. That's like our superpower as humanity. And so this thing around representation, I think it's actually permission giving. Because when I see someone do something that has something that looks like me, I'm actually at some level experiencing it myself. And therefore, it is easier for me. So that example of, 1 to 2 hours, sub 2 hour marathon is possible. A lot more people are going to do it. And it's not only a psychological thing. It's like something quite physical and visceral about that experience. So it matters. And therefore, that's why whenever organizations say that we're going to home grow talent, we must lay chicken, we must lay the eggs and then they must become a chicken. I'm like, no, it's not a chicken and egg thing. It's both. It's not chicken or egg. You need to have homegrown talent, yes, but you must also bring in senior female leaders to actually be part of starting your journey. Because if you just have homegrown talent, because these things take time, you will actually, there isn't the right environment. It's almost like, like stealing an egg versus nurturing an egg. You actually need people who are similar to actually keep on that going. And maybe the last point to support what Celiwe said, at the core, we are human beings, right? And therefore, there's a lot of Brandons out there who might look very different, but actually we are very similar. Brandon and I are granny's kids kind of thing. That is the inner recognition around that. And therefore, there are many other people. We mustn't make this journey to be exclusively about women. It actually has to be about human beings actually taking on the next journey kind of thing. Because it's not even an altruistic thing. It's a self-interest thing. Fathers often have daughters. And the dreams that they have for their daughters is surely about fullness, agency, authority, autonomy, those kinds of things, right? And therefore, how do you create a world where that's possible? And even those that have sons only, they have nieces and their sons will get married, they will fall in love. You know what I mean? So for the sake of our own self-interest, I think we need to turn this into a human journey. Just like we've walked a journey, there was a time when we thought it was okay to actually hold someone, take away their rights, and use their body for labor. That was and at some stage, as a collective human consciousness, we realized that's not right. There was a time where, as a collective consciousnness, we thought someone's sexual orientation had to be one thing, and increasingly, as a collective, we're realizing that's not the case. So these are powerful. To take on the forest is so helpful when it's not one guy chopping the wood, the chopping the forest, like one Lord. It's helpful when there's a collective of us where every day, because it's a forest, it grows at night. Every morning, everybody takes their axe and chops away.
Absolutely love that. And it's in a way, particularly the chicken and the eggs analogy, I couldn't agree with you more, because obviously it's great to grow talent. Obviously it's great to sponsor, but it takes a long time. And I think one of the frustrations as a leader is, why are we still so far away? And I can speak for my own business, and I can speak for most other businesses that I work with. Why are we still so far away? Why is progress not happening? Because, as you said, Funeka, as a collective, as humanity, we've come to realize how important this is, and we've come to realize that it does go beyond gender. It is a, as I said at the beginning, for me, it's a performance question, and it's a societal question. That's the society we want to live in. We seem to realize that, but yet we seem to not be able to make the progress that's required. I don't know if either of you have any perspectives on what are some of the barriers we still have that's inhibiting our progress, and are there things that we should be doing as leaders, as other leaders watch this? What are some things that we can continue to do?
And I can give a perspective, but then I'll hand over to Celiwe. I think if I look at the context of South Africa, I think that maybe this might not be, that might be just a personal view. It looks like we have prioritized racial transformation over gender transformation. And, I wasn't always conscious of this, even myself, until at a later stage, because I think race had been such a big feature of the relations of this country, right? And so when I sort of grew up and grew up within the context environment, corporate environment, and then started to really experience senior African males, I realized that it's actually quite different. I guess I grew up in an environment professionally. Of course, at the time when I qualified as a chartered accountant, there was less than 100 of us who were African females. And we were incubated by this incredible organization called African Women Chartered Accountants Forum. That was started by the first 4 African women CAs. So in a way, I felt its presence in a visceral way. So although I worked for a very large professional firm, I felt like I belonged to this. This also became a part of who I was, So Cindy Goyana, Cindy Zilwa, Tsidi Mokhabudi, and as well as Nonkululeko Koboto. I mean, these 4 women are like the making of the mothers of African women CAs kind of thing, chartered accountants. And so I felt that. So I think that however, as I got outside of the professional environment, I realized that African males actually are quite different to us. I don't know if you've experienced this, Ross, and I think, Celiwe, I think that it is, I'm not sure if it's just the reality of another forest, which is like the mythology of patriarchy, that also comes in there. And it becomes complicated as well, because it's sort of like it has a potential of being a separating thing, right? Because in some way, the forest at some stage in this country was the belief that if you are Black, you cannot do A, B, C, and D. So now, if we can't take on 2 forests at the same time, because the other forest where some of the Black guys are in there as well, that if you're a woman, you can't do A, B, C, and D. So I think it became like a little bit too much to take on at the same time. That's my belief. But I think it's because also there is most certainly an issue of the mythology of patriarchy. And it is deep and it is strong. And I think it's a conversation that is still not quite mature of where people, and remember the thing around the mythology of patriarchy is that the big sponsors are often women too, right? So it's a highly complicated conversation to take on. That's my take on it. I'd love to hear what Celiwe's views.
Sure, I've never thought about it like that, but I think there's so much truth to what you're saying, because I think the deep rootedness of patriarchy in South Africa is very much attached to culture for us. And until you understand African culture, how, like when Funeka tells the story of her grandmother, how anti-establishment that was at that time, even now, it's completely anti-establishment for an African woman, an older African woman, to be articulate, to be comfortable in her skin. That's what she was. If she's in her heels, she's in her makeup, she's confident, and especially when she gave the example around the fact that culturally there was this expectation of being covered up. And not that there's anything wrong with that if it's your choice. If you're comfortable with that, that's what you buy into. But when you get into a corporate and professional setting, those things are now playing in the same field that has to do with professionalism, that has to do with qualification, that has to do with mentorship, sponsorship, success, promotion, all of those things. It's extremely complex when you put it into that cauldron. And I find it interesting because I remember having heard some of Funeka's story when she talks about Bichler, like about sponsors in our own careers. If I have to count sponsors in my career, almost all of them are white males. I have to think very deeply. Almost all of them are white men. And why that is, why it happens that way, why it is that they can recognize the need to advance, to progress, to choose discriminately so, because it is a type of discriminate decision to sponsor someone. It's not necessarily based on merit alone, right? It's a conscious choice that you're making about that person. You choose them, you will remove barriers, you will prioritize them, etc. Why is it that the two of us can share stories about white men who ahead of us decided to do that for us? It's a more difficult conversation because I think it's multiple layers of stuff that happen, particularly in an African context. It's very layered.
And I think, some of this has to do with, I told you that the big defenders of patriarchy are women. So some of this, so I'm about to defend, some of this has to do with numbers, in the sense that a lot of if you look at the leadership at the time when we were formed, a vast majority of leadership was white males as opposed to black males. And I suppose that at the beginning of your journey, I think, Sisi, you are trying to make it through the day. And so sponsorship is such a hard conversation to think about it. But the one that gets to me, and I mean, I think maybe Standard Bank is probably one of the few places where you would experience this, because there's such a critical mass of black leaders, and many of them are male. There is a rhythm to black male leadership is very different. Like the way they talk, the words they use, the pace they use is very different. And this thing about, it's amazing how we all love being different, but being different isn't nice. Being different is like psychologically is very isolating, so because in the last couple of years, I've realized that I have had to, when I walk into those environments, I have to actually consciously decide how I am going to communicate for this group of people, because it is fundamentally different. And I think that there's often a risk of not getting heard, because I think a voice like mine is not normally associated with agency, authority, autonomy kind of thing. And so it's a completely different ball game to actually work through it. And I think that, I guess the reason why I think it's important that really when I actually vocalize this is because I think young Black women actually experience this more and more because their leaders are mostly Black male. And when these things are not vocalized, they get personalized. So you think it's you. It's not you. You know, it's just, these are not the same things. These things are different. Yeah.
You know, Funeka, as you're sharing this, let me share a story that will make this so practical for people. So last week, a very good friend who happens to be Black and male was diagnosed with COVID probably 2 weeks ago, and he was hospitalized last week. And this is after, you know, many of us kind of saying, dude, this is not a great oxygen level. You need to get to the hospital. His wife is panicking. She's asking for help, etc., etc. Anyway, he takes a turn for the worse, and he's just hospitalized. This is a professional Black male who's a lawyer, a banking and finance lawyer, and he gets into hospital. And a few of us decide, let's actually organize a Zoom call now that it's been a few days, just to encourage him, you know, have a few friends on the line, all share, like talk about our experiences with COVID or whatever, and just say to him, hey, dude, we're with you. So the dial-in details get shared, and I happen to dial in on time. When I get in, there's 6 guys on the call, 6 Black guys, all of them speaking in one language, addressing each other by clan names. And I remember messaging my friend Lundi, where like, I said to her, I don't think I'm supposed to be, did you send me the right meeting details? I'm not supposed to be here. And it's strange. I speak fluent Zulu, so I understood everything they were saying. I know all 6 of them, mind you. By name, I know their wives. Like, these are not people who are foreign to me. But I stepped into a Zoom call, and immediately I felt like I don't belong here. These guys are having, they are like a very manly conversation, that the clan names are coming out there, you know, all sorts of things that I was like, what is this? What's going on here? You know, I mean, a few of us ladies eventually dialed in, and the temperature kind of toned down, and we had the call we wanted to have. But I think those are now the practical realities, because Funeka is so right. Now you're at it's like that representativity is not just racial anymore, because actually, I think the system has tried to correct for it, right? There's enough kind of people of color, maybe not enough, there's more. That's the wrong word. There's more people of color. And so the conversations are going to become more textured by these sorts of dynamics that I don't think you could have necessarily thought through or have planned for. It's completely different.
And maybe if I can just lean in with a question to both of you on the back of that. And this is very much, you know, from my personal opinion, so I am in desperate need of being educated in some ways. But I struggle to understand the difference between my job and my responsibility in changing the narrative in a room or in an organization. So, you know, coming into calls like that or into meeting rooms, like you say, Funeka, or in sponsoring people, as you may need to do at certain levels of leadership, there's a combination of how much is it your responsibility to change that script because you are different, because you are representative of a minority in any way, whether that's gender, race, any form of diversity beyond that as well, versus how much of it is the responsibility of leaders who are maybe not as well informed to step up to the plate, to educate themselves, to find the right ways to change. Because, and I don't have a right to say this as young as I am and as early in my career as I am, but it's very exhausting to have to always remind people of how to take up spaces and how to be mindful of the broader context. And I'm just curious, I guess, sort of in closing, about what you, or maybe where you think you are on that job versus responsibility scale, and what we should all be doing to influence those spaces.
Yeah, it's such a good question. You know, I think that when there are difficult things to be done, there is definitely a need for leadership. I think leadership, our continent, our world needs leadership, like really strong leadership. However, what I have learned about leadership is that leadership is not a one-dimensional thing. That leadership is a combination of the leader, the followers, and the context. And all of us have a place to a role to play. I think that leaders tend to be effective only because the context allows them to be. Like, you know, that right place, right thing, right place. So we as followers, so whether you are an employee, you are a follower, so to speak, versus your leader, we all have a role to play. So that's my fundamental thing. I do think that leaders have to have very specific outcomes. The way in which we run the business, I don't go to shareholders and say, oh no, we'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll make money next year. This is something that is important to the sustainability of business, as well as it's quite a key input towards achieving your business objectives. So it cannot be left to chance. So I do think just because it's a key input of your business success, we have to have very specific plan, very specific targets, and very things that are observable and things that are auditable. I think processes must change. Nobody should ever, for example, be interviewed by an all-male panel. There should never be an all-male panel anywhere. Those things there must be the rituals and ceremonies must change. And then because I'm also, in my work, I'm a leader as well as I'm a follower. In my context as a follower, I think it's very important for me to always show up in a way that is adulting about these things. So if you remember the transactional analysis framework, that there's 3 ways to show up, either as a child or as an adult or as a parent. I am not a child at work, or in many of my contexts. So I'm going to show up in a way at work, in a way that really make sure that my expectations of conduct are clear. And because I'm an adult, I am not going to get tired of pointing out in the right forums, in the right context, and being discerning where their behavior is not appropriate. Because I'm an adult, I am not going to allow another person to actually treat me in ways, and understanding that it's not personal. If the tree is growing on you, still not okay. Might not be personal, but it's not okay. And since it's not okay, I'm going to remind that. So I guess what I'm saying, Sisi, in my view, leadership in this requires very strong, accountable leaders. And it also requires, when we're playing the role called follower, to also be adulting about and really not allowing things that are not okay to happen. My last comment is, I think our mental health is important. I think when you find yourself in an environment where you're constantly in an abusive situation, which can happen at work, you have a responsibility to leave. You must stay long enough, as long as you can, but it is not okay. You do not have the responsibility. It's not, you don't be overly zealous about it even we're a point where you are actually hurt, or it's beyond, because it's beyond your capacity to deal with it on a daily basis, because it can get to that. These environments can get very abusive. I have had a seriously abusive line manager in my work. I think that, when I look back at this, I think this person, had I allowed them, they would have actually destroyed me. And not just at a work perspective, but would have destroyed my spirit. And it's only when I decided not to allow them to do so and decided not to work closely with them that I survived. But imagine if I had a role where I had no choice but to work closely with them, I wouldn't have survived. So sometimes it's actually also okay to walk away and look after oneself. I hope that makes sense, Amirah.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you so much, Funeka. 100%, especially that mental health comes first. I think that's something we always forget in, bearing the brand of it has to be me to make the change because I'm different. Celiwe, is there anything you want to add to that as we move to? Yeah.
I love the points that Funeka made about it. I think for me, as I was just thinking and contemplating what I would share about a job versus a responsibility, I do think that the more senior you become, or the more you become the leader, if I have to use Funeka's terminology, the more the two merge. It's very difficult, the more senior you become, to separate your job and your responsibility. And I find it's hardest when you're early in your career, where the job outweighs the responsibility, in fairness. The power is weighted against you, is the reality. And yes, you can call out these conversations, but you need someone with the job and the responsibility to take on the mantle. And we just happen to be in that place where I believe our jobs and our responsibilities are more merged than they were certainly earlier on in our careers. And it depends on every leader, how they see their responsibility. It's a legacy thing. It's about what matters to each leader. And I also don't think that other people can impose a responsibility on you. You know, for some people, that might be gender representativity. It might be success to the ultimate level, like I want to become CEO, whatever the question may be. You know, everybody has a sense of responsibility about what they want to achieve in their career. And the more senior your job becomes, your ability to exert influence over your responsibility becomes so much higher. And so for me, that's the consciousness you've got to work into as a leader, is there's going to come a time when you'll actually have the ability to shift those more than you did years prior. And what are the things that you're going to shift? And what are the conversations you're going to lead? And what are the things that you're going to challenge? And they're different. They come with you as you mature, as you continue to have different conversations with different generations of employees. But also, I think as you become more conscious of yourself as a leader and start to think about, well, what is it that I want to leave behind? What is it that I want to be remembered for? The mental health thing is so important, because I think you also need to be careful not to take up a cross that's not yours to take up. Like if it's not your portion, it's not what it is that you're supposed to be, it becomes harder. And so again, for me, it's a real self-awareness thing about what it is that's mine to take on, what it is that I know I have the platform to be able to take on and make a difference. We will exit our executive roles, other people will enter them. And I mean, I don't have any qualms about the fact that I will exit and I may not have achieved everything I set out to do, or may not have shifted everything possible. But I think I'm very consciously aware of the things that are really meaningful to me and really meaningful to the legacy that I want to leave behind. And the things that I know I can change, consciously, actively, I can change them. And so I'll change those. Those are the ones I'm going to start with first. They're the easiest. And then the rest will start to come as we go. Fortunately, I think both Funeka and I still have age on our side with pretty young executives. There's still quite a lot of roadway ahead. So lots to do, but our journeys and our responsibilities may well be different. Our stories may be similar, we may look and sound similar, but our responsibilities are so much more ingrained in who we are and what it is that we want to leave behind than all the broader societal issues that are out there.
Amazing. Thank you, Celiwe. I think mindful of where we're at with time, the first thing I just really want to say is this conversation has been a stark reminder for me of my privilege of having access to leaders like all of you, the support from Brandon, from an Alexa perspective, just being able to reach out to both of you and have these kinds of conversations is incredible. So thank you for sharing your time, your personal insights with us, and giving so much of your morning, early start to the week with us has been amazing. Thank you. Brandon, anything you'd like to add in closing?
I'm completely inspired by Funeka and Celiwe. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear more from you and get to know you a little bit better. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm really glad that you're young leaders, because it means that more of your leadership to come. So thank you for everything that you're doing.